I think when a lot of people think about the CIA, especially on the outside looking in, it's almost like they probably know more about everything that's going on than the rest of us. So they're never going to be subject to the whims of what they're needed for or anything, because I think a lot of people almost look at the CIA as they're the ones pushing their own agenda, especially when you think about the pre-church era, that like maybe there was some truth to that, but I think a lot of people still think that CIA is kind of pushing their own agenda, so they don't need to worry about what lawmakers or decision makers or policy makers need them to do. Right. And that's probably not all that accurate, I imagine.
I don't believe it is. I mean, this aspect of the discussion will always drive a lot of commentary from viewers. Whether the CIA is rogue or not, or drives its own agenda, or is politicized, and there are individuals who might be politicized, et cetera. But at the end of the day, the CIA is there to serve the president and help the U.S. have the best information it can in order to facilitate decision making. But envisioning the CIA, not going away isn't that hard for me, because for the first 160 years of our nation's existence, we had no centralized intelligence authority, right? We had intelligence entities that rose or fell fundamentally as we went to war, but we had no peacetime intelligence gathering capability, and certainly nothing that was centralized across, the government until the OSS really came into play, in World War II. And when Truman came in after the end of World War II, he said, we don't need the CIA anymore. We're not at war. He changed that in about 6 months, and largely because of Russia, right? The Soviet Union and its expansionist plan really drove the recognition that we needed a centralized intelligence collecting organization, and so that's what kind of gave rise to the CIA. But the truth of some of what folks are concerned about is bureaucracies tend to become self-focused on their own preservation, right? And so I think there have been time in the CIA's history, clearly, when correction was needed, correction of individuals that were in charge, correction of the direction of the organization, so that it continues to remain aligned with what are the nation's interests instead of its own bureaucratic interests.
Yeah, it's like anytime you're in a position where a apparatus of government is making its own policy, right? That's never a good thing, right? And some people, it's ultimately humans work at these places, right? It is still humans, is still subject to human ego, human ambition, human error. All of those things are still true, whether you're at the CIA or any other government apparatus or anything in the private sector.
And absolutely, there have been times when Frank Wisner or Dulles and his brother, and others in the government sat down and said, okay, yeah, Arbenz needs to go, right? Now, was that really the best policy for the United States? Was it a policy that supported, United Fruit Company? Was it, all of those sorts of things that probably or definitively were outside the bounds of the structure that was set up for CIA, in its initial days. And, in the GWAT, we came to face some of those same questions, and some of them got answered wrongly about what were the right roles and responsibilities, in that kind of Title 10, Title 50, what's interrogation, what's, a torture debate.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the first 20 or 30 years, that post-World War II, that transition from OSS to CIA, it's, I don't want to say you want to give grace, because there were some horrific infringements on American citizens' rights. But you can look at that and say, new organization, figuring out what and how and where, and figuring a lot of things out, right? So there's bound to be room for errors to happen. And then when you look at 9/11 and all the legislation that came in, that changed the authorities and changed the responsibilities of so many different places. Certain things are being brought together and say, hey, CIA, FBI, you need to work better together. JSOC, all these other places, so much changed as far as what you could do, what the NSA could do, what the NSA could collect on.
Right.
Again, it's almost like there's bound to be errors in there, because it's our old SOPs don't work anymore. The status quo doesn't work anymore.
Well, there's no such thing as perfect foresight, right? And you're playing whack-a-mole with threats, right? So, as you knock one threat down, another threat pops up. And again, you don't have that perfect foresight to predict them. Humans are involved at every step of the process. So how that human decision making happens, people responding to fear, responding to threats, responding to pressure in the workplace, et cetera. All of that impacts all of that. Money is a huge driver, right? Money flowed into that. And I think, back to the part of the question about the change in the organization post fall of the wall and post 9/11, the CIA, people within the CIA decided we had a role to play in prosecuting the GWAT that required us to go back to being a little bit more like the OSS than it required us to be like a 1960s and 70s CIA focused on, transiting the halls of diplomacy.
Yeah, that makes, that makes a lot of sense. And, there's, in that process, we can point out all the things that the CIA or the intelligence community has messed up over the years. Most people will never understand how many lives they've actually saved and just never made headlines. There's a lot of things that they get right.
There's a great line in the movie The Recruit and that Al Pacino is in, and he says, our failures are known, our successes are not. Right? And you just have to learn to live with that. Your successes are almost never known.
Yeah. And that's, again, going back to recruitment and who the CIA is looking for. It's somebody that's okay with that you're not going to be on the headlines. You're not necessarily going to get credit for your work. Right.
In the early days of the CIA, when CIA officers would do something momentous, worth recognizing, we have our own series of awards and medals that we issue inside the CIA, and some are known, the Intelligence Star being one. But they used to call them jockstrap medals, right? Because they would never be something that would be seen publicly. In fact, often they'd be issued and then taken back and put in a safe at headquarters until such time as either that person had left the agency or that operation had become declassified, et cetera. And folks just have to be okay with that.
Well, and, I think that for a lot of people, especially whether it's in the intelligence line of work or the special operations world, a lot of guys, I think it's more important to them to have the recognition of their peers than it is of the public. And so I think it is somewhat satisfying to know that, hey, there's intelligence professionals out there that are being recognized within the halls at Langley or wherever in the world they are for doing good work, and they're getting that positive feedback. I don't care if you're a hardened case officer or not. Humans like a little bit of positive feedback every once in a while.
Absolutely.
You don't necessarily need to thrive off of it, but like every once in a while, an attaboy goes a long way.
Yeah, and if that attaboy comes with, some form of, at least within your peer group recognition and sometimes a little cash, that all goes a long way towards encouraging the right behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of flash back, to your first overseas tour. Can you kind of walk me through what your first meeting with a live asset was? And I want to preface this, by the way, not only for you, but for our audience. There's a lot of the conversation, a lot of the questions I asked today. I understand we can't talk people, places, methods. So take that with a grain of salt, but I'm more interested in the human story of some of this. So can you take me through that first meeting with a lot, like you're really doing it?
Yeah.